Welcome to ACC Nation. I'm Jim Quist. That's Will Ogenin. And our special guest tonight is the site manager of 1 Foot Down, Joshua Vowles. We're going to be talking about all things Notre Dame. We've got a lot to talk about. Oh, do we have a lot to talk about? Let's jump into basketball first and talk a little bit about what Mike Brey has done. When we were promoting you being on the show, we were talking about this is a surprise team. And they're sitting at number 2. They're just behind Duke. Yeah. And I'm surprised. I think a lot of people are surprised that Notre Dame men's basketball is sitting where they are right now. Right. And man, do things look really good for them going into the field of 68. Joshua, thanks for joining us, by the way.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about Mike Brey and you know, what the season has been like so far. And if it was a surprise for you that they've done as well as they have.
Yeah, first of all, it is a surprise, but it shouldn't be. The main core of the lineup are guys that are fourth-year seniors. It was one of Mike Brey's best recruiting classes. It came after that 2015, the Elite Eight runs. Here comes the good recruiting classes. And things just haven't happened the way we had hoped for some continuity as far as our winning ways were concerned after the Elite Eights. And it just didn't, wasn't happening. And, a lot of it had to do with, especially last year was a real lack in play of defense. I think Notre Dame's always had shooters and the guys can shoot. But last year you really saw on the court just how poor their defensive play was. Bringing Anthony Solomon back to Notre Dame really upped their game defensively, which has been a big turnaround for what they're doing this year. I didn't quite expect the ACC to be as down this year as it's been. As far as I have problems with that perception, anyways. I don't really even like saying they're down, other than that's what the national perception is. We'll see when it gets to the tournament time, but sitting at number 2 is definitely a shock. I go back to our first conference game of the season against Boston College. Go out to BC. Just get manhandled. I mean, just dominated physically. They beat the crap out of us. And, I was like, okay, well, how is the season going to go? Because that should not have happened. Was about a week later, Notre Dame beats Kentucky. Like, oh, maybe things aren't so bad. And then once we got back into conference play, things started coming together, and we're just rattling off wins left and right. And bringing it back to BC, BC comes back to South Bend, and we're looking, all right, revenge, time for a beatdown. And we had just gone through like a string of 7 games where Notre Dame held their opponent to like less than 65 points or something like that. They've been playing really well defensively. BC can't shoot. All they're doing that game is not missing. It was just, it goes into overtime. It was like, I think it was like a 90-80, 82 or 90-85 score or something like that. But it's like, all right, well, this is just a team that can play with, plays up to Notre Dame and all that. So it's been a big surprise all season long. I think when you think what we're getting with Notre Dame, it kind of takes a little bit of a curve. So we'll see what happens as we try to finish out this season. We're already got the double bye, but just the way that we're trying to position for bracket positioning, it's like, can we get a 7? Can we give it a 7 seed? Can you get into a 6? And talk about the number 2 team in the ACC. Trying to squeeze into a 7 seed is just something I didn't think I'd be saying. But that's what it's all about right now is for them to keep working towards, the best position possible in the tournament. Because once they get to the tournament, with the shooters they have, if you got all these shooters, you need a guy inside. Paul Atkinson's been really, really good down low for them all season long. So with the shooters they have, they've really got a chance just about anybody they play against, just based off the fact that they can shoot 3. So
one thing about the ACC, we've sort of regionalized in how it's receiving press attention. I know that in having worked out in the Chicago market, I get that Chicago is more of the focus for big press for Notre Dame for the most part. And then you can split up, everybody in the Northeast is either in Boston or in, some other market there. And of course, then you get the teams that are in Carolina, the Raleigh market, et cetera, Charlotte. And then you go down into Miami, and Atlanta, of course, with Georgia Tech and all that. So, one of the things that I noticed sometimes, and I want to see what it is here, talk about teams getting attention on a national basis. Are we missing? I'm on the East Coast. Will is out further west from Chicago. He's at Minneapolis. Are we missing the story nationally, the coverage that should be there for Notre Dame, because the press is spending too much time talking about, let's say, North Carolina, Duke,
Right.
And Virginia, et cetera, Wake Forest? Are we missing the story?
Well, I mean, I just don't think there's any way around it when it comes to the press and the blue bloods. I think even more so in college basketball than in college football. I just think it's an easy line for the press to go to right off the bat, because there's so many more teams in college basketball that are actually make a difference. Notre Dame's a little bit different monster because they were independent for so long. Even in basketball before the Big East, imagine the history of Notre Dame with the games against UCLA and all that. The media attention that Notre Dame gets is it's nowhere near football as far as the national coverage, but there is a little bit extra catch. It's not real significant, but it's just enough. But I mean, you got to do some lights out things to make attention. So, beating Kentucky was big, but even back in December, beating Kentucky, and then they kind of took a little bit of a nosedive there for a minute. That kind of win dissipates a little bit. Now it's talked about more as they've come back up, and that's a really huge win. So I don't know. It's in Indiana, Notre Dame is not going to get the basketball coverage that they're looking for. It's IU, it's Purdue. I mean, our head basketball coach, women's basketball coach, her son, Jaden Ivey, it went to Purdue. So, we missed the boat on that one. We're going to miss the boat on some of the media stuff. It is very double sweat, not to insult a whole lot of fans out there. I used to be one when I was a kid. A lot of double sweater fans out there, Notre Dame football fans, IU basketball fans. And that causes, especially, I think the national media picks up on what the region's doing, right? Like it's just like, picking up AP stories. They're picking up what that is. So the vibe is more IU, Purdue, Big Ten basketball coming out of our area. Notre Dame has to do more extraordinary things to get that extra attention. And that's all right. I mean, we're used to that. Even, our last few years in the Big East was just as good as any conference has ever been. Those last few years, they were just absolutely incredible. In the Big East tournament, out there in New York, huge deal on the East Coast. Sitting in, I live just 20 minutes northeast Fort Wayne, Indiana, just right inside Ohio. It's just not a thing. No one talks about it with that loving glow that you hear like a fan from St. John's or Georgetown, would talk about it. So, but the ACC has that sway inside that more so than the Big East ever did. So when we talk about the ACC tournament and start, talking about, Duke and North Carolina and all that, picks up a little bit more. And we saw it back when Notre Dame had, that 2-year great run. It became a big deal. So they got to do the things to get the coverage, and that's all right. We get a little more coverage than we probably deserve in football some years. And so, we'll make up for it, by not so much with the basketball.
So you talked about some of the reasons this team has kind of overachieved expectations. I'm one of those people who I thought they'd finish probably middle of the pack and had a shot to go to the tournament this year, which I think is very fair. But one of the reasons I think this team is, kind of blown up in a good way this season is the emergence of Blake Wesley. Now, he was he was ranked outside of the top 100 in pretty much all the recruiting services, and he's sat out last year, obviously, but has really blown up. So what about his game has really led him to become a potential quote unquote one and done? Yeah,
I don't like to mention one and done because I'm really tired of people mentioning it, because I don't want him thinking, of course he's thinking about it. I'm talking about karma, but no, I get what you're saying. Blake, please stay. We got Starling coming in for 1 year. Please stay. Dude, he's just we haven't had the drive slash player like Blake Wesley is, and we just haven't had that for a long time. I mean, Chris Thomas is the name that comes to the mind, the guy that could get to the basket, create things. But Wesley's a little bit more than that. He is a freshman, though. He has took a lot of bad shots this year, like a lot. But his athleticism and just his ability to score from anywhere and to score quickly has really set him up, and it's helped out everybody around him. Prentice Hub, who might be maybe the most unselfish player on the team, it's his minutes for the most part that Wesley end up taking, and Hub has risen his game. Dane Goodwin's playing as good as anybody in the conference. I mean, the dude's been incredible, and it's a quiet. There's a quietness there, and all of that stems from having a player with that kind of athleticism that Wesley has, where these guys, this group of guys that haven't been able to go over that next step over these 4 years, he's the guy that was able to kind of give it that little bit of a shove. And that's the thing. A great player does that for the rest of your team, and we're seeing that right now.
So a lot of the time he tends to play the two, but sometimes, especially he'll spell Prentice Hub at the one and be the ball handler. Has he been pretty good as being a ball handler?
He's not as good. He's not as good as a ball handler. That would not be. It's not Notre Dame doesn't have a lot of ball handlers, and I mean Brey, doesn't use a deep bench, so you're going to have to, move around a lot as it is. So he does okay, but obviously you want Hub handle the ball, but yeah, I'd much rather have two.
I think that's a pretty easy answer there. Well, you mentioned Prentice Hub, and you mentioned like probably the biggest thing about him is, especially his ball handling, is turnovers. I think he's cut his turnovers in half from compared to last year, but his shooting numbers are down. Is he just having a hard time shooting? What's going on there?
Prentice Hub is just a strange kind of science project. He has not shot the ball as well as he had, even his freshman year. And the numbers might disagree with that a little bit, but you just see him struggling at times. But of all the players on that team, the guy I want shooting the ball when the game's on the line in the clutch situation is Hub. Some of these shots might go like 50 feet, and I mean he has the biggest rainbow arc on some of these balls. You're just waiting with bated breath, just waiting for these shots to drop. But he's been the most clutch guy. He makes the play, makes the plays that they need to do. We've seen it last year. He did that in the ACC tournament. He got a little fun with it, with some fingers to the crowd. But he's definitely been, numbers are down, but he's the guy you want shooting the ball. And Mike Brey has said that over and over again this season and last season, that there's just something about that moment that gets him in the right spot.
Well, you mentioned him a moment ago, but I was going to talk about him a little bit later, but I want to get into him now. And that is the guy who's coming in, JJ Starling, who is I think he's about a top 30-ish recruit, a high level 4-star, borderline 5-star coming in for next season. Is he someone that's just going to get a ton of minutes right away for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Notre Dame isn't a program that's used to bringing in one and dones. They don't bring in, very high profile recruits. It's just not what they do. And so you kind of wonder what would happen if we got one of these guys. And you're seeing it now with Wesley, where he's taking minutes away from a guy who's a 4th-year senior and Hub, who's basically entrenched. And now Wesley is, a major part of what we're doing. Starling is going to be a great player. And there's no doubt that he's, a one and done, in most people's eyes, a one and done candidate himself. So right away, he's going to get to South Bend and, get in the work. Well, it's always a wait and see with any of these guys. I'm not going to say any exacts, this is exactly what's going to happen. But he's definitely a guy that we're all waiting on to get there and to excel. So I expect him to be a big part of the team next year. But we'll see.
Got a question for you. Since we've got a lot of the ACC tournaments are on the East Coast, it would only be fair to have it out in the Midwest at least one year. It may be Chicago. What do you think about that?
I mean, for Notre Dame's sake, travel wise, sure. I'm a traditionalist though, so I don't mind going into enemy territory for anything. So I like the tournament where it's at. Look, there was nothing better than winning that ACC tournament, in North Carolina, beating Duke, beating North Carolina. I mean, that just felt like we just went in and stole all their lunch money for their entire career, lives. Not just that day, but all the lunch money. And that's great. That's what I love about college athletics. That's one of the best things about it. The Big East tournament in New York, that was special because of that. Hey, look, if it's an ACC tournament and it's an ACC country, that's where it's at, and that's fine. I have no problem with it. Chicago's Big Ten land, and I mean, again, that's a quick trip for them. That's less travel time, which helps teams out. But I don't know. I don't mind keeping things, some things how they're supposed to be, and that just feels like it's supposed to be there.
Okay, fair enough.
But I would be in favor.
You guys want to go to Chicago? We'll hang.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's only like an hour flight from me out of Minneapolis, so count me in.
I'm always
baseball will be up there. Notre Dame baseball will be up there in about a week and a half or something like that up in Minneapolis. So.
Okay. Well, interesting.
Might be a foot of snow on the ground, but we'll see.
Well, I had to take a double take. Like, what? Wait a minute. Oh, yeah. It's indoors up there. So.
Yeah.
U.S. Bank. Yeah.
Yeah. U.S. Bank. Yeah.
Hopefully.
Not Target.
Not Target Field. No.
Let's talk football here, and let's start out with the dancing abilities of a former coach, and then we'll kind of go from there and see where this takes.
Look, I'll say this. We've all known just last spring, as a matter of fact, Brian Kelly broke out some dance moves that were just, I don't even know how to describe them. I don't have the words. I don't have the vocabulary for what I witnessed last year on that. And it was like, he was wearing like a green suit. Dude, it was insane. And we loved it. We all ate it up. We thought it was the greatest thing. We thought, this is just awesome. That's BK being BK. Little did we know, like 9 months later, that was not going to be the thing anymore. That we were wrong. We were dead wrong.
Let me ask you something. How could it struck me the way he departed, that you try not to ever burn bridges ever, because it's just not a good idea. But I kind of felt like the dude was throwing gas on stuff and tossing matches vicariously as he was walking out the door. How do fans feel about it?
First of all, that's what Brian Kelly does, right? Like, he didn't leave Cincinnati in a good situation. I mean, it's kind of, you kind of do what you know, right? So if you're leaving a school to go to another school, you're just kind of falling into what you know how to do. Not saying that it's the right thing or the wrong thing.
He's an arsonist, in other words.
But the whole situation was just kind of insane to us. To me, especially. Look, I posted a story that says Brian Kelly is not going to LSU 1 minute, literally 1 minute before the news broke that he was leaving. And you got to be kidding me. Like, what? So my Twitter mentions I'm just smoke cotted for like weeks after that, And
Old Takes Exposed got you, didn't it?
It's like within a minute. I'm like, just give me like 20 more minutes. Let me get this next story up, about how wrong I was. But my reasoning about it, before that was just things that he had done and has been going on with him and his life and his family life and coaching life in and around Notre Dame. And it was all adding up to, he's going to get another extension. It's probably going to go to 2026, maybe 2027, probably looking at a retirement around 25, like the year before the contract's up, kind of where you see most people. It was all leading on that path. He had just bought a huge double lot just right off of campus. I mean, right off of campus, built a huge new house. He had been living on a lake outside of South Bend, basically this whole time. But he was kind of positioning himself to be that that coach emeritus, kind of the way Era was for so long in South Bend,
Right.
He's retired, but he's still a part of the university by being, the proximity of the university. And it was all adding up that way. And to see kind of how to know now how it unfolded, you kind of see how Kelly did what he did. He was looking for that extension, and Jack just wasn't coughing it up this time around. We had, a couple of playoff blowouts, which, by the way, most people get blown out in the semi. If you're losing in the semifinals, you're getting blown out. It just It is what it is. Notre Dame takes a lot of heat for it. It is what it is. But Swarbrick kind of seems like he wanted some more results rather than just automatically laying down that extension, and which is a little different than what we've been used to. So how much that angered Kelly, I'm sure if I was in Kelly's shoes, I'd be a little pissed too, for everything that you've accomplished, everything that he accomplished as a rival, the program, the way what it's done in especially the last 5 years is that terrible, the 16 season, winning all these games, all this stuff, breaking Rockney's record. Just kind of, if you're Brian Kelly, you position yourself to kind of like set your own terms in a way with the university. Well, the University of Notre Dame is bigger than the football coach, and Swarbrick kind of saw it that way. And some of it's known, some of it's unknown, some of it's just kind of an opinion. I just think Kelly got pissed off about it all. You get this opportunity to go somewhere else, and he took it. Any other reasoning beyond that? I mean, the cultural fit is besides the family.
Yeah.
None of it makes sense. His daughter is I think she's a senior right now, so she's still, it's not a big deal. She's wrapping up her last year at Notre Dame right now, but he's got another son that's up at Grand Valley State. So you're going down to LSU, like it didn't quite make much sense. Kelly isn't also, I mean, he's kind of been given a pass by the national media since he's left, as somehow he's a great recruiter. As I can tell you can ask just about any Notre Dame fan, they will say, no, absolutely not. Carter Carl's writer for the South Bend Tribune. He's at the paper in Tallahassee now. He covers Florida State. But he did an article that basically blackballed him and the South Bend Tribune for a couple of weeks. He spoke to a couple of recruits down at an All-Star game in San Antonio. These are high-profile recruits that Notre Dame needed badly. 5-star wide receivers, top flight guys. They never talked to Kelly. It wasn't he didn't talk to him. He didn't call him. None of this was going on. So when Carter published that piece, it put a huge spotlight on just exactly what Kelly was doing as a recruiter. And it's stuff a lot of us have already known. He's not involved early on he's more of a, kind of a closer guy. But in today's day and age of recruiting, it just doesn't work that way if you want the top flight guys. Kelly is still playing that Cincinnati mid-major recruiting game, kind of like almost like a wait and see kind of a thing, where you're waiting for chips to fall and then you go in and grabbing and pulling them in. So him going to LSU to go up against the money machine at Texas A&M, Nick Saban at Alabama, and that's just in your division. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, that's not gonna, no duh that he had some kind of weird dancing video out. He's got to up his game, and he has no idea how. So he's going to have to do something. The whole thing is just wild. I mean, the more and more it gets down. John Bryce he's with Irish Sports Daily, but also with Football Scoop, had a really in-depth piece about the whole situation. Kelly being inside of a home, getting the phone call with LSU and all that. Talking to Tommy and I think Della Alexander in the car after leaving the home about, maybe going to LSU. The whole thing's wild. It never would I have thought that. And you got a team who was on the verge. If Auburn wins that game against Alabama, Notre Dame's probably in the playoff. Auburn doesn't screw that whole thing up so badly. I mean, there's a whole bunch of small things, even championship weekend. The Big 12 championship game went the way we needed it. You needed one more domino to drop, and it just didn't. I mean, counting on Iowa to do anything is just for grow corn, I don't know what you're going to do.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
to leave a team when you're like this close to getting back for your third playoff in 4 years, it's just wild. It's just at a school like Notre Dame. This isn't Cincinnati. This isn't just. And I'm not the guy who like to talk a bunch of smack about Notre Dame is so much bigger and better. But I mean, come on, it's a blue chip program. To just drop a blue chip program head coaching job, you're that close to getting back to the playoffs, and you're definitely going to a New Year's Six bowl to bolt for a job that's just been bad the last couple of years because the guy driven into the ground because he's chasing skirts. Doesn't make sense. So it's wild.
Yeah, indeed it is. And you're right. That boggles my mind. Just thinking about departing a blue chip program of that stature, just because there's some aspect of your personality that got ruffled. And that's what
and LSU, if I'm not wrong, is in some trouble still with some Title IX stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's not like you're going into like the most stable of situations.
Mm-hmm.
They got a great locker room and great stadium atmosphere. The food is incredible down there. I get it, but you're not walking to a great situation if you're not a great recruiter. You're in the SEC West. Have fun with that, and the NCAA might actually do something, which is strange that the NCAA would do anything anymore. But I mean, when it's Title IX, though, I mean, it's a little something different. So
yeah,
I don't know.
Get a little bit of that federal backing really quickly, and that'll burn you. And thoroughly pun intended. He's walking into a swamp. Will.
We haven't even touched on his random like accent on his first in his
Well, I mean, Purple BK, that sun down there in the bayou. I mean, I'm not sure what shade he's gonna hit. By like game 3. So
yeah, must have had some really good Cajun or something. But
if you're talking to your broker, now's a good time to buy whatever you can with what company's got sunscreen, because the Kelly family is going to be just eating that up.
Need it. Big time.
All right, let's get into the now though. Marcus Freeman and what he's done in the short time he's been there. Obviously, when Brian Kelly left and Marcus Freeman took over, most of the staff stayed in South Bend. Not only that, they're crushing it in 2023 recruiting. They have the number 1 class right now, according to 24/7. I didn't check Rivals before this, but a lot of those commits were actually committed when Brian Kelly was still coach, but they're sticking around, at least for right now. Probably waiting to see some on-field results. But what is it about Marcus Freeman that like people just tend to gravitate towards him?
He is a ball of energy. He's handsome as hell. He's dynamic, and just that personality type, a guy who just wants to succeed, stays positive in what he's doing, has a message that he sticks to, and just he has a Rivals profile. He's a young coach, so as far as recruits go, he relates better to any of these guys than just about every college head coach out there right now. It's been quite amazing. But yet the day that all happened, I got to tell you, was probably the most fun I had online on Twitter. It was absolutely insane. From Tommy, from the meeting from Kelly in the morning with his team that got secretly recorded, it was a bunch of nonsense. And then he just bolts. Tommy coming in saying that he's staying, the announcement of Freeman. It was just kind of a whirlwind. And then all these coaches were saying they were staying. They weren't going there. They weren't going there. And this whole vibe was just hoorah. It's just like, this is pretty amazing. Now, since then, things have changed quite a bit. A lot of those coaches are gone. Notre Dame's had to replace most of those coaches that we thought were sticking around. And in fact, all of the offensive coaches besides offensive coordinator Tommy Rees, who was getting courted very heavily, not only by Brian Kelly at LSU, but at Miami, was coming after him pretty hard there towards the end before Gaddis. So replace all that. Then you got probably your most beloved assistant coach, Mike Elston, defensive line coach, who a big culture guy, just like a huge, like, this is what Notre Dame is all about, which is crazy because he's a Michigan man who grew up I always call the guys in Ohio that went to Michigan traitors. I'm from Ohio. You go to Michigan, Notre Dame's fine. It's a private school. Otherwise, go to Ohio State, go to Michigan, you're a damn traitor. I never thought I would look and love a person as much like that as Mike Elston, but yet I did. And then he ups and bolts for Michigan. So the bowl game, he was doing the defensive play calling, didn't go great. And I think he kind of saw the writing on the wall. He was not going to become a defensive coordinator at Notre Dame. So there was a whole lot to replace. And the guys that Marcus was bringing in fit a lot of the same profile he fits in. Great recruiters, absolutely great recruiters, can relate to the young players, dynamic coaches, guys that have been proving themselves even in short times, like a guy like Chancey Stuckey, wide receivers coach. He had 1 year at Baylor, but you talk to anybody his time in the NFL, his time at Clemson, Dabo Swinney put a stamp of approval on him. We're all pretty excited about that. In fact, Al Washington, I guess Freeman's filling it in with ACC guys. Al Washington, a Boston College guy, coming in, taking over defensive line, was a great recruiter when he was coaching Ohio State defensive line. So it's just funny. All the pieces that we're staying, we're all hyped up for. I had shirts and sweatshirts made that said "Loyal" on it. They sold like hotcakes. I'm glad we got that 3-week sale out of the way. And then little by little, guys started finding other opportunities elsewhere. And then Freeman's done a great job of hiring guys. He brings back Harry Heastan, the offensive line, one of the great offensive line coaches of all time. Won the Joe Moore, helped Notre Dame win the Joe Moore Award a few years ago. Put Quentin Nelson, Mike McGlinchey, Zach Martin, Nick Martin, all these guys in the NFL. He's coming back for another stint. So we're all pretty excited. We got this young staff. It's a very diverse staff. You think about how big of a deal it was when Notre Dame hired Tyrone Willingham before Willingham just absolutely failed. But, the fact that the African-American coach, the first one there at Notre Dame, I think there was a lot of people's minds, maybe some older folks that just thought that wouldn't happen again. And here we are. We got another African-American, African-American / Asian. His mom's, I think she's Korean. But it's a diverse staff. This is a young, diverse, culturally diverse staff that is just a different take than what people would expect at a place like Notre Dame. And it is very welcomed by the alumni and by the fans.
Well, obviously, if you're going to succeed, you need some stability at the quarterback play. And last season, Notre Dame went through 3 of them. This year, Jack Cohn is gone. So what's the quarterback situation looking like?
Yeah, use 3 in Brian Kelly fashion. Use 3. Jack Cohn was the man. I think Notre Dame fans get a little used to that, where throughout the Kelly era, that you got your main guy, but he's gonna might pipe in a guy here and there. We're kind of used to that fashion. This year, yeah, it's a crapshoot as far as what we're going to expect, because we haven't seen a team coached by a non-Brian Kelly squad. So now it's going to be 12 years. So now Tommy Rees is the guy making the calls. It's going to be Tyler Buchner, almost assuredly going to be the starting quarterback in Notre Dame for next year. We saw him a lot last year, mainly in some running situations, but has a strong arm. Just they didn't use him like he wasn't the backup coming in. He was a guy that came in as a changeup to Cohn when couple of different runners there, between Jack Cohn and Tyler Buchner. Drew Pine was used, and sometimes last year. Pine is back, Buckner's back. And it's so you can say it's between those two, but Buckner's going to be your starter. And your first start as a college quarterback is going to be in Columbus against what might be the number 1 team in the country. So pretty insane.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah.
And we're going to have a new starting running back, and let me get into that because Kyra Williams is gone. Yeah. But there were a couple of, his backups played fairly well in the limited action. Logan Diggs, he only played 8 games, but had a real nice season. Chris Tyree had a nice year. So in general, Notre Dame has just had one guy getting the bulk of the work. Is that going to be the case going forward, or could we see more 2-back sets?
Well, I mean, whether or not even if they run 2-back sets, it's going to be, are they going to rotate backs in? Mm-hmm. And
yeah,
I think Kyron Williams is one of the all-time great Notre Dame running backs. I've been a debate in the offseason about that. And I think I can say with a lot of confidence, he was pretty good. He's great. He's one of the all-time greats. He ranks right up in the last 25, 30 years. Logan Diggs had a good season last year, kind of a good showing. Expect a lot for him. Chris Tyree was actually hurt a major portion of last year. Turf toe, which if you're a running back, wide receiver, turf toe is just it's such a terrible injury. And yet he had a kickoff return for touchdown with that turf toe against Wisconsin that kind of set off that whole fourth quarter that really put the seal of it on it. So there's some speed. Logan Diggs has that running back, that more running back look. Tyree, that speed back running in between the tackles isn't as sure. They got a huge power back in Audric Estime. He's a guy I love. Just Google his name, Audric Estime. Look at the pictures of this guy. He looks like one of the running backs Georgia has, hauls in. He's Hercules, man. He's insane. And he's just ready to devour. So they got some great pieces in place. They got a really nice running back out of Texas, Jadarian Price, freshman. I think they're going to want to try to use a lot of these guys. Hard to say exactly, new running backs coach coming in. And what reason? I mean, I just don't know. Like with Kelly, Reese is calling the plays, but how much of the game plan throughout that week, Kelly's involved in that. So how much does that affect his play calling, what you're going to use, how you're going to use it? The offensive line was pretty much in shambles the first 5 weeks, of last season. That's what, solidified now where last year, a starting left tackle game 1 was a true freshman of Blake Fisher. He gets hurt in that game. By the time we end the season, your starting left tackle was a true freshman in Joe Alt, and he's a freshman All-American. So now you got these 2 sophomores coming in to bookend at tackle that are just incredible. You bring back your offensive line coach. Is Notre Dame going to get back to more of a power running game? You would think so with Tyler Buckner, playing quarterback. There's going to be some more running action, probably some more RPOs. We're waiting on spring to kind of see how this starts to get pieced together, because I think you could go a whole bunch of different ways, and you could be right or you could be way wrong.
So the schedule, it obviously you're coming out of the gate real hard right away with, like you said, maybe the number 1 team in the country in Ohio State. And then it's bookended by, USC in the Coliseum, who may or may not be overhyped just because they have the hot new coach. But in between, pretty manageable. I mean, just among the ACC schools at UNC, replacing Sam Howell, that's going to be a big question mark. At Syracuse, Dino Babers may be on the hot seat. They're trying a new offense. Clemson, you get them at Notre Dame. Yep. Clemson's got a ton of question marks because they are replacing their offensive and defensive coordinators. Boston College, okay, they got Phil Dracovic back, and this is at Notre Dame, but still
that might get juicy.
Yeah, exactly. But this schedule, I feel like there's a real good opportunity for another 10-win season for Notre Dame.
Yeah, I mean, it does set up pretty well. I think that the trip to Columbus, it's not going to be make or break. I mean, obviously, if you win it, obviously you're setting yourself up pretty good there. But I think a loss even in Columbus doesn't really. I'm not sure how much it's going to say what Notre Dame is going to be for the rest of the season. I really have my Clemson circled on the map. I think Clemson has become since our partnership with the ACC has come about, Clemson's kind of become another rival type for Notre Dame. In fans' eyes, and I think in coaches and players' eyes, just because of the level of play of both those teams when they've met. Not quite a Notre Dame Miami of the late 80s, early 90s, but there's something there. And the more you get to play them, the more that happens. I think that just there's some tricky games, but there's so many winnable games. You're right. It's hard not to see 10 wins. USC is just kind of a big coin flip, and they're sexy, right? Because it's going to have Lincoln Riley. They're going to be scoring points, all that. But their offensive line is still meh. Their defensive line is still meh. I mean, just defensively overall. So, they may fall under that weight of expectations, especially towards the end of the season. But Notre Dame, no matter how good or bad SC is, that last game, that late season trip out to LA is tough, especially Notre Dame, the way they travel around the country. We make a West Coast, that'll be our second trip out to the West Coast that year. Your legs start getting a little tired. I mean, in 2018, USC was terrible. Notre Dame should have went out there and beat them, 42-3. And we're struggling to get out of there. And you look at those guys out there and they're just, they couldn't move. Their legs are stiff. It's like they're in mud. And you just knew from this, from the swings that year, how much the travel had beat them down. So we'll wait and see. And, we thought last year's schedule was going to be pretty brutal. It ended up not being, too terrible.
Mhm.
But there's always some trickiness to it.
Mhm.
And we'll see what teams rise up. I have great faith in college football. I have great faith in programs surprising us each and every year, just from wherever. So, even a school like North Carolina, who lost Sam Howell, Mac Brown's still done a pretty good job of recruiting down there. They have some talent. It's going to be down in Chapel Hill. I'm expecting a fight. So, we'll have to just wait and see.
You mean to tell me the sky won't be falling if they lose to Ohio State?
An 0-2 Marcus Freeman start. I mean, the sky will be falling for some. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And let me just.
It's already fallen, man.
Yeah. One more thing before I give it back to Jim. And I think you bring it up a good point about how this Notre Dame Clemson thing has become real nice. I mean, obviously the championship game a couple of years ago was kind of a dud, but the game in South Bend 2 years ago was an instant classic. That was a whale of a game.
Yeah, and I have a lot of beef with our Twitter friends from the Athletic and other sorts. The Coastal Carolina BYU game was touted as the greatest college football game of that season and blah, 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 blah. And I get the cool factor of it all. Hey, let's go play a person and go cross country. No question about it. But seriously, number one, Clemson comes to South Bend. Trevor Lawrence is out. Uiagalelei comes out and throws for like 400, throws for more yards than any opponent quarterback in Notre Dame history that night. You get a close win like that, a great game. That was just an awesome game. That doesn't get enough credit. Call it the COVID year where everything's turned upside down as it is, but that game definitely deserves more credit. The 2015 game in the hurricane down in Clemson was another great game, and it all sets up. And really, I think a lot of Notre Dame fans. I don't talk to a lot of Clemson people, so I don't know their opinion. Maybe you guys can ask them. I really think that 2015 Notre Dame Clemson game was the game for Clemson that set them off in the trajectory that they end up taking. That was the game that put them back on not just on the map, but set them on the path to go win some national championships and be who they are. That was the game that they were used to losing, right? And that's why Dabo's out there screaming about guts in the middle of the rain. It was a crazy, great game, and left a bad taste in a lot of our mouths for the Notre Dame side, which is how you want a rivalry to start. And I think there's the seeds of that. And, you kind of want to ask the ACC, like, hey, can we just get Clemson like every other year? Doesn't have to be every year, but can we make sure the schedule has them every other year at least, just to kind of have that set up with the conference, because it's been fun. But for both sides, I think it's been wildly beneficial.
I'm wholeheartedly right there with you on that opinion. I think that rivalry, as it's established, has been, and it's because you've got two great teams, and when they throw everything, including kitchen sink, in on that game, it's fun as a fan to watch that. And as Will points out, and you pointed out, these games become classics and kind of burn into your psyche a little bit. I'm willing to give Marcus the first year and not have a lot of high expectations, even though in the back of my mind, I'm thinking the Irish are really going to tear some, new.
They got a pretty good team this year. So
yeah, but I'm still willing to sort of put that, that disclaimer out there just in case. But I think Notre Dame looks absolutely solid for the next couple of years. what I see is a consistent number 5 and above team. And I know that's where everybody who's a fan of Notre Dame wants them to be. We'll see if they can capture what has been an elusive championship. Let's talk about championships briefly.
Yep.
Notre Dame has just had a phenomenal season sports-wise.
Yeah.
Just nailed down a couple of championships. They've done very well in a lot of sports. Basketball looks good. Men's basketball looks good. Women's basketball is starting to rebuild and doing a great job.
Rebuild.
As you pointed out, the Notre Dame fencing team just won the ACC championship over the weekend. I mean, it just goes on and on. And one last thing we'll just sort of touch briefly on here is top 25 baseball, Notre Dame. Who'd have thunk it? Here is a team that again seemingly come out of nowhere, especially last year, and now is really starting to dig in its heels and do something solid. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's, I'll tell you what, in 2020, Notre Dame went down to, first year with new coach Link Jarrett. They went down to North Carolina, swept them, and we're sitting in the parking lot to take on Louisville, and Notre Dame looked great. Like, they looked better than they had in years. And that's when they got the call, season's over, COVID's, taking over. And so we were left with, after that, we were kind of left that whole year wondering, how good can these guys be? Because Jarrett immediately, we're making these guys, players. Well, we saw that last year. And, I would argue Notre Dame deserved that home series more than Mississippi State did when we played them. No one wants to go to Stark Vegas, and Mississippi State is great, won it all. They're incredible, but that was a great series. Notre Dame had their chances, but I can't remember the exact argument it was, but there was an argument to be made that series should have been in South Bend. Notre Dame should have been playing in South Bend that weekend, but that was out of nowhere. Right? Like, we hadn't seen Notre Dame play to this level, and oh man, I don't even know. It was like 8-9 years. It had been a minute.
Right.
So in playing in the ACC, against great baseball teams that, all the great baseball programs in the ACC, you kind of think, all right, this Link Jarrett knows what he's doing. Notre Dame's a great school for, we think of it, it is definitely a football school, right? And men's basketball has a great history, women's basketball, but it is a great school for all the other sports, because all these other sports, and baseball is kind of in that halfway where, like the NCAA likes to say, who's going pro. So, hey, how'd you like to come to Notre Dame, get a Notre Dame degree for free for 4 years, to go play some sports and go kick some butt? And a lot of these programs do that. So you offer this great environment, this gorgeous campus, great weather in South Bend, and they go out and they're all these programs are doing well. Jarrett comes up, takes care of that baseball program, gets these guys playing a much better defense, pitching's a lot more dialed in, and then they went on that tear last year. Nico Cavadas was just out there just crushing, killing balls. So it was a lot of fun. I had a blast with the baseball season last year. Notre Dame hockey, it's a Big Ten program in hockey, but right now we're hanging up Big Ten banners in South Bend is kind of like a really funny joke to us. Like, still, like, even when in 2020, when we were the ACC in football, we all joked about, like, what if we actually win the conference? What are we going to do? What are we going to do with the trophy or this banner? It's a funny concept to us. So Big Ten's funny concept, ACC was for football, but it's a great environment up there athletically. And, being on a small campus, your ratio for athletes to regular students is much greater, because of that. And so it kind of breeds this, competitiveness on the field, in the classroom. It's a great time. So we're having a lot of fun as long as I keep winning. And none of that matters if Notre Dame goes 4-8 in football season.
Hey, I'd be remiss if I did not mention men's lacrosse, because Coach Corrigan and I went to the same school together.
Okay.
So,
yeah, women's lacrosse is taking a hit this year, just barely. But men's lacrosse been for ACC, another great conference for that. So it's a good time. And I think every Notre Dame, the only games you got to pay for are men and women's basketball, hockey, and football. Other than that, everything else up on campus is free. Lacrosse, baseball, softball, all that stuff is free to the general public. So if you're in and around the area at all, want to catch some great games, I don't think Notre Dame needs me to sell it to them for you. I'm just saying it's a great kind of environment to do that. Or if you go up there for for a football game, check to see what other things they got going on, and just check it out. There's some great facilities up there, and yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Couldn't ask for better PR for Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think they might disagree a little bit.
Well, hey, I'm not going near that. Our special guest, site manager of 1 Foot Down, Joshua Vowles, has been our guest, and thank you so much for joining us, talking about Notre Dame, the Irish, what's going on.
No, thank you.
It's been fantastic having you on the show.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, man.
Well, I appreciate it, guys.